Okay, we're back. Okay, we should be back online. No, this is currently where the shrine for him is, but historically that's not where he's from.
Okay.
But if you wanted to go see the shrine to Micah, you'd have to go up there. Gotcha.
There it says you're live.
There we go. All right, sorry about that, folks. Now, what we know with Micah is that he lived in a small town outside Jerusalem. So we think, why was he so connected to Jerusalem? Well, we know from both history and from the book itself that there were 5 fortress cities around Jerusalem that were established to protect Jerusalem from invasion. So Micah would have had regular contact with the people of Jerusalem, the kings, the priests, all those encounters. So what he is, he's a prophet who witnessed what was happening. Although he was rural, he wasn't stuck out in the boonies. He was connected to what's happening in the capital. All right, so that's kind of weird. All right, let's take a look at some of these. Who is he, what, where, when, why, and that. Joyce, do you want to just read the who is he part?
Sure. Who is he? His life has disappeared behind the word which he was sent to proclaim. But as for me, I am filled with authority, justice, and courage to declare to Jacob his transgression and to Israel his sin.
I'll just get you to stop there, Joyce. So what do we know about Micah from that passage, from that single verse?
He's filled with authority.
Yeah. Courage. Justice. He's a man he's brave, right? We don't know anything about him, where his family name comes from. He really is disappearing into history. But we do know his character, that he is a man of justice and courage. So you can imagine this small town farm guy who really knows little, begins to speak the word of the Lord to very powerful people, and they have cause to listen. So no matter who you are, if the Spirit of the Lord is upon you, you have authority, justice, and courage. You want to keep going there, Joyce?
His name is a shortened form of Micah,
We'll go with that.
which meant who is like Yahweh.
Yeah. And don't worry about this.
Jeremiah 26:18 has the full name in the Hebrew text. No father is given, which implies a poor, rural family origin.
If you notice, a lot of the names in the Old Testament and New Testament are Beth or Ben. I'm about to sneeze.
Bless you.
Thank you. So somebody might be Ben Israel or Beth Israel, or so Alex would be Ben Dylan, right? And Christina would be Beth Donna. And Ben means son of, and Beth means daughter of. So that's why we get like a bar mitzvah and a Beth mitzvah. So because his name is simply as it is, there's no lineage. He's not connected to anybody of any importance. He's just a guy. So really, he's an anonymous prophet. And there's something to be said about the anonymous prophets. Good. Dan, you want to read the what?
Micah opposes 2 groups. First, he opposes other prophets, and that means people who are his colleagues. They aim their word, Micah says, not in accordance with justice, but with their own advantage. Whoever raises his voice as a prophet on behalf of justice will find, in a world of injustice, public opponents.
We see this time and again in the prophets where they speak to the priests and the kings. How many times have we seen that, right? There's a problem here. And Micah does the same thing because he's an outsider. He's not a part of that formal world of priests, the grandeur of their dress and their power and that. He's an outsider who looks at what the priests are doing. And just turn to Micah 3:5.
I was just going to ask about that, because that seems very much like today.
Yes, the outsiders are speaking into it.
But it's just, it's crazy that they say there is prophets then that were not prophesying.
Yes, and we're going to get it deep into that in the book of Micah.
Which makes you think, well, then they're not a prophet.
That's right, and they can't be. Well, they can claim to be.
That's right.
But, yeah, and you want to read Micah 3:5?
This is what the Lord says. As for the prophets who lead my people astray, if one feeds them, they proclaim peace. If he does not, they prepare to wage war against him.
Does that sound familiar? So, is that Bonnie tell us we're offline again? No.
No, she's just admiring our H&D construction.
Excellent, excellent.
She was asking if it was an ark.
It's good when we get instant feedback like that. Yeah, you think about it. Micah's saying, look, if you feed the prophet, he says, bless you, your world is going to go well, right? But if you say something against you, they wage war on you. So what was the motivation of the prophets?
Say well.
Well,
To be looked after.
to be looked after. Selfish gain. Yeah, exactly. And Micah, as the outsider, has that voice on the inside, to the inside. So he speaks to them, and then the second group, Dan Singer, you're doing well there.
Verse 6.
No, just in the notes here, the second group.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine.
The second group against which Micah speaks, therefore, are the responsible officials in Jerusalem, persons who he addresses as leaders and rulers.
So do you want to read chapter 3, just the first couple of verses, so we get a taste of it? We'll move into the book in the weeks to come.
Listen, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of the house of Israel, should you not know justice? You who hate good and love evil, who tear the skin from my people and the flesh from their bones, who eat my people's flesh, strip off their skin and break their bones in pieces, you chop them up like meat for the pan, like flesh for the pot.
So you can imagine someone on, I don't know, Parliament Hill with a truck and a big sign that says, "Woe to you who eat the flesh of the people, who strip off their skins and eat their bones." You know, that's kind of what Micah is doing. He's protesting a corrupt government who is taking advantage of people. And really, between the priests and the kings, all they want is what? What do they want from the people? Just their money, basically, right? They're money-grubbing leadership. They want advantage to themselves. They're not there to serve the people. What is the role of government? To serve the people. What is the role of pastors and priests and all that, to serve the people, right? And that's why Paul says, that we are to equip the saints for effective works of service, to equip people so they can do what God has called them. Well, these priests and these politicians were equipping themselves. They were filling their trough, pretty fast.
Gaining on it, yeah.
They were gaining on it. And so Micah, as the outsider, looks at the world around him and says, we have a problem. That is, our leadership is really serving itself, not us as people. Boy, does this sound familiar, right? These prophets speak to the world we live in. All right. What's his big deal? Dylan, why?
Why? He addresses, one, the prophets, because they lead my people astray.
And I think Danny read that verse for us. And
2, the political leaders in Jerusalem, because they eat the flesh of my people.
we read that one?
3, the officials at Moresheth, because they drive the women of my people out of the homes they love.
Could you read 2:9 for us, Dylan? Chapter 2, verse 9.
You drive the women of my people from their pleasant homes. You take away my blessing from their children forever.
So these guys were actually confiscating property for their benefit, driving the women out into the streets. Okay, and fourthly,
And he addresses them all in general, because they rise against my people like an enemy.
so all across the society, the leadership was being corrupt, taking advantage. And so Micah just sits back, and he's probably having coffee at Subway, and you're talking about all the bad things in the world, and he says, enough is enough. And he goes out and he speaks. And boy, that spirit, that feeling is so common to us. We sit and we listen and we watch, and we reach this point, we go, what can one person do? And Micah goes, well, I tell you what one person do. He can hear the Lord, and he can go out and speak to society. Now, interesting, Micah was heard. Didn't go well, but he was still heard. All right, so what was bothering him? Joni.
Injustice. It shows itself, according to Micah, primarily in 3 activities.
Okay, so he looks and says, there are 3 things that are unjust in society.
In coveting what belongs to others.
And what's coveting? Wanting. Wanting the houses of these women. They want something. Good.
In perverting justice.
Good.
And in hypocritical.
Sorry, Joni, those are tongue twisters. Very good. What does it mean when we're hypocritical? Two-faced, yeah.
Say one thing, do the other.
Exactly. So they were pretending to be religious and noble and good on the one side, but on the other, useless. Like we saw in Sunday school, he's like a penny, two-faced and worthless, right? And that's the definition of a hypocrite. So he looks up and he says, our society is unjust. There are people taking from others unfairly. They aren't just. We've many times said we have a legal system, not a justice system. And those who are in the place of religion, who should be caring, and here is, as James would say, here is pure and undefiled religion, to visit the sick and the orphans in their distress, and all these things that are truly what God calls us to, they're not doing that. And he's getting mad. Henry, up for a little bit reading. Oh, Joni, you're doing great there. Keep going.
Selfish coveting is for Micah the source of all sorts of evil.
All right. This whole idea that I want what I want and I'm going to take it, that's the root of Micah says, this is the root of it. Does that sound familiar? What does Scripture say is the root of all kinds of evil? The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, right? Coveting. I want what I want. And that's exactly, it's funny, what Micah saw in under the old covenant, we see in nothing new. So, Joni.
Micah takes the word covet from the 9th and 10th commandments, Exodus 20, verse 17, and says, 2, verse 2.
Yeah.
They covet, steal, and seize them, and houses, and take them. They oppress a man and his family, a man and his family.
So not only they're taking from men, they're taking from women, they're just taking land. They're land robbers, right? So he begins his sitting back in his little town outside Jerusalem, and he begins to, maybe he went to town that day and saw what was going on, or just witnessed over time. And we take a look at who he's talking to. Well, one thinks immediately of the officers and administrative officials from Jerusalem who had been assigned to the fortresses. So these fortress cities that are around him where he would do business, they are governed by urban officials, by politicians, right? And I'm not anti-politician anyway, but they're governed, and he sees their behavior. Then he sees how they see the beautiful countryside and say, I like this, I want this land. And they begin to take the land away from people. Yeah, exactly. People see what they don't have, and they take it. Yeah, well, that's the problem. Yeah. Yeah. So turn to Micah 2:1. Harlan, could you read Micah chapter 2, verse 1 for us?
Woe to you who lie awake at night plotting wickedness. You rise at dawn to carry out your schemes, because you can. And you do.
Good. So what are these people doing? How does he describe these people?
To lay awake and plot evil.
Yeah, they're laying awake at night thinking, okay, there's that quarter section over there that belongs to Harlan. That's got good drainage on it. It's got, how can I get that from him? And they would go, I know what I can do. And they plot, and they wake up the next morning, that's what I'm going to do. That's the typical portrait of the covetous, the selfish person. They just lay in bed and they scheme. They're like, I don't have a mustache, but that.
My version says because it is in their power to do it.
That's right, and they have the power to take it away. Yeah, it's one thing to have power and not desire. It's one thing to desire and not have power. They have both.
There's the annexing land.
Yeah, because they want it. Good. As a result of these imaginative planning, their basic covetous quickly matures into a brutal and violent act of property and people. Property they seize and they oppress. We've already read those two verses. So this is partly what Micah is seeing. It's land grabbing that's going on. Other measures are strictly forbidden by God's laws. Thou shalt not oppress thy neighbor or rob him, which is exactly what they're doing. They're robbing their neighbor and they're oppressing him. And so Micah must accuse Jerusalem's leading officials in every field of one crime above all, that is the hankering for money. The city's leaders give judgment for a bribe. In praise, they interpret the law for pay. The prophets give their revelation for money. Henry, do you want to read 3:11? Micah 3:11?
Here they judge for a bribe. Her priests teach for a price, and her prophets tell fortunes for money. Yet they look for the Lord's support and say, is not the Lord among us? No disaster will come upon us.
So, what are the priests and the prophets doing here?
They're being bought off.
They're being bought off. And what are they saying?
No harm will come to us.
No harm will come to you. Don't worry. If you give me money, I'll prophesy and no harm will come to you. I was watching, and I won't say his name, a guy this week, and he was talking about getting money. Like, you got to sow a seed. You got to sow and he said, in these troubled times, if you want to be protected, you should sow a seed. Matter of fact, you need to sow a seed. And
Name rhyme with Dolan?
not quite, but close. And he's saying, if you want to be protected, and the bigger the seed, the more protection. Well, so if you give me more money, God will protect you. And during troubled times, you need protection, so you better give me money.
Oh,
And I just about threw the phone against the wall.
How much did you send them?
Well, it was only a $1,000 seed, so. But this whole idea of, we look and we say, well, this was the time of Micah back in the thousands of years ago. This is happening today. The prophets are saying, if you want God to protect you, give me money, and then you'll be protected from the oncoming plight. And then he said, and money just is going to disappear and have no value. I'm going, then why would I send you money? Like, why do you need money?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, wait a minute. You said my money is going to become worthless in the coming economic crisis. That means your money is going to become worthless in the coming economic crisis. So the outrage of Micah is the outrage we have today as we listen to these men who say, a penny for a bribe. God will bless you if you pay me. Yeah. There's nothing new here. So consequently, I guess you don't have a copy in front of you, but
Okay.
Donna, what's the consequence?
Where am I?
Bottom of the page.
Those who twist God's hand, is that?
Sorry, what was his message?
Okay. Doom.
Thank you. I was waiting for that. One more time, Donna.
Doom.
I'm doomed.
Doom.
Good. All right.
Keep reading?
Yes, please.
Okay. First, woe, hoy. That is the cry of lamentation which is customarily heard throughout ancient Israel's clans whenever death struck home.
So when there's a death, that's the word you cry, hoy! My aunt has passed on, So that's the word woe. It's the cry of lament of death. I know it sounds kind of like hoy, but it is. It's what you cry out when you're in pain. Hoy. And so he says to the nation, hoy, and they'll go, who died? Keep going on.
According to Micah's adaptation of this woe, the selfish schemers are actually rotting corpses. Whoever pushes people aside in a selfish quest for things is pushing life aside and seeking death.
And that's why he uses the word hoy there, because it's the word of death. So he goes, hoy, they say, who died? He says, you did. You all smell like corpses. You're rotten flesh, you. Does this sound like somebody else who described the Pharisees as rotting graves? Jesus has described the Pharisees as stinking graves. He said to them, hoy, you smell like death. And that's why Micah says, anybody who does these things is the agent of death. But what does God bring? Life. So we often talk about, not often, on occasion we've talked about shalom, right? The peace of God. And the peace of God brings with it the blessings of God and the goodness of God and all these things with it. Well, this is the opposite of shalom They're bringing turmoil to God's people, and as a consequence, they're speaking death. So keep going on.
Second, man's evil planning has already been encircled by God's superior plan.
I'll just stop there. So they're planning all this evil, but Micah says, I have wonderful news. Your plans may be this big, but God's plans, they've already encircled around your plans.
Micah becomes more precise. You will not remove your necks from disaster. You will no longer be able to walk uprightly. Micah even puts a dirge into their mouth. We are utterly ruined. Our captors divide our fields.
So they sought fields, and what happened? The enemies came and took the land away from them.
What's a dirge?
What's that, Harlan?
What's a dirge?
A dirge is a lament, a song of death.
Oh.
So if you sing a very sad song, that's a dirge.
They're singing it.
They're singing it, yeah. It's interesting, the Christmas hymn that we sing,
In the bleak winter.
no, not in the bleak winter, the one that's the French one that we sing ahead of time.
O come, Emmanuel.
O come, Emmanuel. It was originally a French funeral song. You can hear the coffin. It's very dark.
And just that mourns.
It does.
And that's the next line.
That's right.
Exactly.
That mourns in lonely exile still until the Son of Man appears, right? So they took a dirge, a funeral song, and turned it into the song of the earth mourning, waiting for the coming of the Messiah. So next time you sing O come, Emmanuel, you got to go, O come,
Boy.
You're gonna, oi, oi! It's a funeral. Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, still, that's good. Thanks, Arden. Donna, keep going. Kind of wrecks that carol for you. Sorry.
Those who twist God's word to fit their own fancies will themselves receive no response from God. Those who aim at nothing but their heart's applause will find that God's voice no longer speaks to them.
So these prophets are claiming, we hear the word of the Lord. And Micah says, I got news for you. Not happening. God is not talking to you. He no longer speaks to you. I watched another prophet this week, and he was saying, Russia will not invade Ukraine. And he was going on, and this was like a month ago. And you're going, buddy, I don't think you heard the word of the Lord. Because
Yeah.
according to my calendar, Russia did, right? So these people are saying, we're hearing God. And God is saying, I no longer speak to you. I am sad because you're prophesying for the wrong purposes. Keep going, Donna.
Those who do not want to be directed by God's instructions will themselves soon no longer be able to bear any instruction from God. So neatly will the punishment fit the crime.
So where the land grabbers were grabbing land, how was God going to punish them? Take it away. The prophets who said they heard God, how was God going to punish them? The same way. They couldn't hear him. And those who said, we're teaching you, the teachers of the law, God was no longer instructing them. So it's interesting. God, he brings woe to each one according to the nature of their crime. So if we were to bring woe to, I'll let you pick a preacher, prophet, or politician, you could say, what would God's woe be upon them? Well, the punishment would fit the crime. Yeah. All right, we continue in the book. Joyce, do you want to pick up the next page?
Yes. The worst threat is reserved for the responsible persons in Jerusalem,
And we'll stop. We'll just read 3:10. Joyce, would you mind reading 3:10?
who build Zion with bloodshed and Jerusalem with wickedness.
It's a tough way to build a city. Okay, keep going.
Yes, blood, guilt, and injustice are not foundations capable of bearing the weight that must be borne. They are, in fact, fatal traps. Therefore, because of you, Zion shall be plowed as a field. Jerusalem shall become a heap of ruins, and the Temple Mount will be given over to the beasts of the forest. Micah 3:12.
For Micah, truth is only painted in two colors, black and white. What's that, Joni? Wall air colors, black and white, clear as can be. God, if you claim to speak on behalf of God but lie, God will judge you. If you claim to, be the people's servant and steal their land, God will judge you. Micah is you can tell he's a rural guy. There's not a lot of subtlety here, a lot of nuance, right? For Micah, injustice, punishment. He's just, you could see him standing over the city.
If Cal was a prophet.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. He is a very clear prophet. This book is not, sometimes I'll say to you, you can feel the language of the book, it's poetic, or, this is a beautifully written, this is a hammer and tong book. As we read it, you'll see that it goes Micah straight up. So Micah is the prophet of prediction. All right, let's take a look at a few of these. We're going to go around the table a bit. Harlan, you want to grab your Bible and turn to Micah chapter 1, 5-7. Doug, maybe we won't read all those, Micah 6:19. So the first one he predicts is the fall of Samaria, that is the northern tribes, to the Assyrian army. So, Micah 1, 5-7, Harlan.
And why is this happening? Because of the sins of Israel and Judah. What sins? The adultery, oppression centering in the capital cities, Samaria and Jerusalem. Therefore, the entire city of Samaria will crumble in a heap of rubble and become an open field, her streets plowed up by planting grapes. The Lord will tear down her wall and her forts, exposing their foundations, and pour their stones into the valleys below. All her carved images will be smashed to pieces. Her original idol temples built with gifts of worshiper will be burned.
Okay. Nothing subtle about that, right? Fire, rocks, turning over. Actually, we won't read the next because it just repeats the theme. But he says to the northern tribes of Samaria, you wanted land? God's going to give you land. He's going to turn your city into a pasture. Then the fall of Jerusalem to Babylon. Doug, if you want to read chapter 1, verses 9-16, seeing as I think you're close there. We won't read them all. They're all there for you, though. Jerusalem to Babylon.
For her wound is incurable. It has come to Judah, and has reached the very gate of my people, even to Jerusalem itself. Tell it not in Gath, weep not at all. In Beth, roll in the dust. Pass on in nakedness and shame, you who live in Shapher.
That's where I gave you the one with all the names, sorry.
Those who live in Zanan will not come out. Beth as Bezel is in mourning. Its protection is taken from you. Those who live in Maroth writhe in pain, waiting for relief. Because disaster has come from the Lord, even to the gate of Jerusalem. You who live in Lachish, harness the team to the chariot. You were the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion, for the transgressions of Israel were found in you. Therefore you will give parting gifts to Moresh, Gath, the town of Axib, through the scepter, to the kings of Israel. I will bring a conqueror against you who live in Marashah. He who is the glory of Israel will come to Adullam. Shave your heads in mourning for the children in whom you delight. Make yourselves as bald as a vulture, for they will go from you into exile.
Good. Thank you, Doug. That was a tough passage. Babylon is coming, and all those little towns all around Jerusalem are going to fall one after another. That's why we know he was a prophet of the Lord. He said, and he named the towns. This town's going to fall. This town's going to fall. This town's going to fall. Prelate, Scepter, Abbey, Leader, Lancer, boom, boom, boom. And when it happened, they said, Mentab, they said, the prophet told us. And you will shave your head like the bald vultures, right? Samaria would be destroyed by Assyria. We know that came to pass. Jerusalem was destroyed by Babylon. We know that came to pass. And then he prophesies that the people would return. Dylan, Micah 2, 12 and 13.
I will surely gather all of you, O Jacob. I will surely bring together the remnant of Israel. I will bring them together like sheep in a pen, like a flock in its pasture. The place will throng with people. One who breaks open the way will go up before them. They will break through the gate and go out, and their king will pass through before them. The Lord is their God.
Good. We'll get into that passage in a bit. Micah's not all bad news. He also says that the people will return. That's why this is called, ruin and then remnant and restoration. It's Micah that promises us the great restoration. Joni, Micah chapter 5, verse 2.
But you, Bethlehem,
Epaphroditus? Sure, we'll go with that.
though you are small among clans of Judah, out of you will come from me one who will rule over Israel, whose origins are of old, from ancient times.
This is the Christmas one. We read at Christmas, right?
We do,
The
yes.
coming of the Messiah. This is from Micah. So Micah predicts the ruin of Jerusalem, the ruin of Samaria, the return of the people, and then he predicts the coming of the Messiah. Bethlehem, out of you will come, you, the least of the tribes of Judah, will come the one prophesied of old, the ancient one will come. And he will do something remarkable. Joni, verse 4 as well. You're doing great.
He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and with a lift to, for then his greatness will reach to the end of the earth.
Who will the Messiah shepherd? His flock. And how big is his flock? To the ends of the earth. All the nations would come. It's not just the restoration of Israel, it's the call that we would all come to the great kingdom of Christ. Not all, I'm not talking about universalism. But that people from every tribe, tongue, and nation, as Revelation says, would come and be restored. And then he gives us even more good news in Micah chapter 4, verses 1 through.
So he preaches from beginning to end, really.
Yeah, Micah gets the Ancient of Days will come, and he tells us the story right to the very end. Yeah, Micah encompasses basically the entire next chapter in human history. Yeah.
That probably didn't go so well with them.
Not really, Harlan. Yeah, Micah doesn't. And again,
Their enemies are going to be...
yeah, they get a little hung up. Henry, how are you up for reading tonight? You ready to go? Chapter 4, verses 1 through 5.
And it will come about in the last days that the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established. As the chief of the mountains, it will be raised above the hills and the peoples will stream to it. Many nations will come and say, come, let's go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, so that he may teach us about his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For from
Good, thank you, Henry. So what's this final picture?
Universal peace.
What's that, Harlan?
Universal peace.
Universal peace, right.
Peace and prosperity.
Peace and prosperity. Why?
They're at the mountain of the Lord.
Because they're at the mountain of the Lord, because Christ is king, right? Peace, prosperity, all these things will only happen when Christ is king. And he paints these two great images of warring armies. They're taking their swords and they beat it into plowshares, right? They bend it, and then their spears, they arc, they heat, they bend it into a pruning hook so you can, cut your vines down. And he says these weapons of war will become weapons of peace. And then everyone gets to do what? What does he say? Everyone will sit?
Sit under
Under
their
the
own
vine
vine and their fig tree.
Yeah, isn't that a great image? Sunday afternoon you go outside and you sit on the deck, in the shade of the peace of your home or your yard, and you rest in that shelter and that peace. He says, someday everyone's going to know the peace of sitting on the deck under their own vine and fig tree. And, figs are luxurious, and the vine would produce grapes, all these wonderful images. This was one of George Washington's favorite verses, that everyone.
Is this the new earth?
Yeah, this is and that's why it's in the day of the Lord. Yeah, it's well into at the end of the, we'd be well past Revelation 20 by now. But again, as Joyce said, Micah is the prophet to the ages. He prophesies to his people of current injustice. He prophesies of coming judgment, and then of ultimate and final deliverance. So it is a huge prophecy. His prophecy spans minimum, from when he spoke, we'll get to the date in a second, all the way until future events. Yeah. This poor little guy that we know nothing about had a lot to say. So when did he say it? Well, the length and times of Micah's ministry, 1:1, in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hez, we know that. So we know he prophesied from 735 BC to 700, about 35 years. During the time of Amos and Hosea, and overlapping the ministry of Isaiah. That's why some of this sounds like Isaiah beating the spear hooks and that.
8th century before Christ.
Yeah, he's 8th.
That's
8th
pretty
century.
amazing.
Yeah, that he would name the town.
Yeah.
Of all the little towns, that's where the Messiah's coming. Boom.
8th century before Christ.
Yeah, if he had rolled the dice, he would have said Jerusalem. He'll come. Well, sure. What are the odds? Pretty good. But that's like, saying, out of scepter will come the Messiah. Like, what good could come from scepter? That's John the Baptist. Yeah. No, that's John's line, not John the Baptist. So, Jeremiah 26:18 gives us the direct tie. We won't read it, to Hezekiah, and we know that he has Samaria. So we know 735, 700 is the era of his prophecy. What's in the book? Well, we got to wrap this up quick. It's abrupt changes. There's no poetry here. He switches from judgment to salvation, all back and forth. He demonstrates a literary technique, and we'll talk about parallelism, not that. And we're not going to go through this, but this is just a rough outline of the book. All right. Let me tie this together. By the way, anybody know the most famous verse from Micah?
Wasn't the one we just read about the plowshare?
Okay, that's famous. Good.
Bethlehem.
Bethlehem is also, there's a third one. What is it that God requires of you? To do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. That's in Micah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's that centerpiece in Micah.
6:8, yeah.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. All right. So, why was it so crucial that Israel remained holy? Why do these prophets keep coming? Joel and Amos and Micah and Isaiah and Jeremiah, these people keep coming to Israel or to Jerusalem and say, you must be holy.
Because they were supposed to be the example to the rest of the world.
Right. Don't be hypocrites. Exactly. Because all the world was to be blessed through Jerusalem, through Israel. Israel was to be the source of blessing, the center of the blessing, and out of the center of that blessing would come the blessed one, the Messiah, right? And if Israel kept sinning, what was she not being? Faithful. She couldn't bless the nations. If she's caught up in sin and sacrificing her children to Molech and all these other weird, gods, she ceases to be the blessing that she was supposed to be to all the nations. And so the prophets keep coming and saying, God wants to bless the nations, but he can't because you're sinning, or he won't. We're not sure. I don't want to be too dogmatic on that phrase. But the process is not going to occur because God's avenue for blessing is not being in the right place. And then, I guess I'll just bring back, we as a church are called to be a blessing, to our community, to be holy people. And sometimes we think, well, why do I have to be holy? Well, because it's through holy people that God blesses others, right? So the call to Israel is stop messing up. God wants to use you, but he can't use you if you're sinning. So get your nation right, and I think the analogous is there. Israel thought, and here we'll pull up our chocolates. Israel thought if they could just be, get it right, get all the surface things right, get the worship right, we'll offer the cows on the altar, the bleeding sheep and the dying rams. And God says, this is not what I want from you, a nice, sweet little sacrificial system. He says, I want you to do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with me. I want you to treat the widows and poor, stop being evil, so that you in turn can be a blessing of a nation. The hollow, chocolate-coated altar would not be a blessing to the nations. What would be a blessing to the nations would be a humble and repentant people. So there's my thoughts for tonight. Now you can eat your things. So if you joined us online, maybe you made a sacrifice. If you're not, the sacrifice. A chocolate altar. They're there for you. Sorry about the technical difficulties tonight. And see you next week.